Well, for some of us, the name Rick Santorum is so much more than an era in Pennsylvania political history or even the story of conservatism. It's the moment when the Republican Party went from being viewed as indifferent to people who work with their hands and live by a trade. With Rick's election, places with coal mines and smokestacks and ethnic clubs started to listen to our ideas. They listened because Rick was one of them. Before the Tea Party or the voter revolt of 2016, Santorum invited us, remember, to join the fight. He was the turning point as a party when we embraced a new ethic, the one already in our national platform, but rejected by many of our state's party leaders. It was the idea that every life has dignity and value and intrinsic worth. The worker, the disabled, the vulnerable life in the womb. You remember that. It was the moment when the pro-life community was no longer in the waiting room, but welcomed to the head of the table because of Senator Rick Santorum. But the thing about him that you need to remember is that, like few others in politics, he's got instinct, real instinct. He knows where the public is moving. He knows what the other side will propose, usually with that unaffordable cost, that price tag, a problem usually that's only worsened by the solution they're proposing. He knows when we conservatives can easily get the language wrong, we've got to correct it. He knows when we're ignoring an issue that's suddenly gone mainstream and we're about to be left out of the conversation. He knows when conservatives are about to be left behind because we even refuse to come up with a solution or a better idea. You pick the progressive issue, and you'll find a conservative, principled answer proposed by Rick Santorum. If you remember, in the last election, his book, Blue Collar Conservative, became the blueprint for the Republican wave, eventually embraced by the party's nominee for president and championed by reformed conservatives to this day in Congress. Well, he's out of power, but he's not out of the room. He's in constant communication with the administration and their allies in the House and Senate, finding the way forward on some of the very big issues. Today, he's championing one that is a phrase that makes many conservatives bristle: paid family leave. Is it a new program? Is it a new entitlement? Is it a violation of the conservative code? What is Rick talking about? No, Rick Santorum sees the problem at the heart of the debate. Struggling families, rising fatherless and motherless homes, a government that doesn't always see the importance of the survival of the family itself. He sees the problem. He hears what the other side has proposed, and he believes he's found a solution rooted in free markets and free people that's earned the support of the White House and conservative leaders in Congress. So today at the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, I am honored to welcome back Senator Rick Santorum and invite him to speak about an issue that could be a moment for common ground and national unity: paid leave for families, or as he calls it, paid paternity leave. I'll be back in a few minutes with some questions. Senator, welcome. You are among friends here at PLC.
Well, that's first off, thank you very much for the overly generous introductory remarks. And let me say thank you for the great work you're doing in leading the conservative cause in the Commonwealth. And, we go back a long, long way from you working on as a kid on some of my early campaigns to working in my office in Pittsburgh. So it's great to see you engaged and involved and having a meaningful contribution to our Commonwealth. And let me just say thanks to all of you for joining this conference, and to each and every one of you. Every time I come back to Pennsylvania, I have nothing but gratitude in my heart for the tremendous opportunity that so many people worked hard and overcame odd after odds in every race that I ran to elect this young firebrand conservative from Western Pennsylvania. And I think we did have an impact on certainly the direction of the party, and over the long term, as you mentioned, the impact that Pennsylvania's had. I mean, I appreciate you giving me a lot of the credit for the blue collar conservative message that I've been out there talking about, but it wasn't just me. I mean, there are a lot of folks out there who have in Pennsylvania. Look, Pennsylvania, as you know, now not as bad thanks to registration efforts, but almost 1 million more Democrats than Republicans, and yet Republicans have been able to hold on control of the legislature and do well in a lot of other elections, even though we're outnumbered. And it's because we have a message that connects with blue collar America, and it's been that way for quite some time. And we do it not because we just talk the language, but because we have genuine concern and we have policies that directly impact those families. And a lot of it is tone, and I agree with that. Tone is important, but you have to have ideas, and you have to have solutions to the problems that people are confronting. Because if you don't, they're gonna wander away because they don't think you care about them. And that issue, to me, the worst abdication for conservatives in the Republican Party has been on the issue of health care. We have, for the longest time, just said, no, we're not going to have any government involvement in this. Meanwhile, government is over half the healthcare system as it is, with Medicare and Medicaid and defense healthcare and VA healthcare and Indian healthcare and public clinics. So it's not like we haven't had government involvement. But Republicans for a long time just said, yeah, we hear your concern, public, but we just don't want to get the government involved in the private healthcare system. The problem is and because of it, it's not working. And so we waited and we did nothing, and people kept complaining, and the uninsured rate kept up. And guess what happened? Eventually, the Democrats were able to capitalize, and then we get a terrible bill in Obamacare. And now what are Republicans doing? They're scrambling and trying to fix it, and trying to spend just as much money as Obama's spending, maybe and sometimes more, to fix the problem that was created by another big government healthcare proposal. This is the problem that we have. We don't get ahead of the curve. We don't see the issues that the public cares about and actually offer a conservative solution. The idea of saying, well, let just the market do it, presupposes that the market is the only one involved in the first place. And it's not true. The government is involved in all of these things. And so the idea that we don't have a solution that changes the way the government interacts with the private sector to make it work better is just folly on our part. So you're right. I've been involved in this healthcare debate for a long time, continue to be involved with the Healthcare Choices Act, which has been adopted primarily by the Republican Study Committee, many in the administration, others, certainly all the conservative groups around, and both in the state and federal level. So I still had that passion to try to fix this brokenness that we have on the healthcare issue. The second issue that I sort of see, it's obviously not as big an issue because healthcare is almost 20% of our economy, but it's a vitally important issue for our country, and that is the state of the family, and particularly the state of children. And we can just look at every metric you want to look at, everything from as simple as the birth rate. I mean, the birth rate in America up until 10 years ago, we had enough children. People were having enough children to replace our population and, in fact, grow a little bit. That was not true for the rest of the Western world. The rest of the Western world was under, two children per couple, if you will. Now America has joined those ranks. I mean, we're now right in the middle of the pack among Western European countries in birth rates. We're at 1.7, which means we are losing population. I mean, America is shrinking, but for immigration, we would be shrinking. And that says a lot of things about our country. It talks about how difficult it is to have and to raise children. Maybe the optimism that's in America. I mean, are you going to want to bring a child into a world that you don't think is going to be better for them than it is for you? There's so many heavily laden thoughts that you think about when it comes to what a low birth rate means to the future of a country. So that's just one, but there's so many more. I mean, the number of children being raised in single parent homes, being raised without really any fatherly involvement in particular. Over 50% of American kids are going to be raised without a father in the home at a substantial point in time in their developmental years. All of these things point to what we see, which is a younger generation that is more depressed, having more difficulties, increased suicides, increased drug use. It's just there's a chronic problem that we are not addressing. And you say, well, what does what does the issue of paid family leave have to do with any of that? Well, the answer is that there have been now a slew of scientific research studies that have been done that say the most important 4 weeks or 8 weeks of a child's life, of not just a child's life, a person's life, is those first few weeks of life. And the ability for that child to attach to a mother or a father and feel the security and stability of being loved. And if you don't have that, I mean, it's left, right, there's no division on this. There's no division in the medical community. If you don't have that attachment, that bonding experience, the chances of you having all of these problems that I mentioned before and more are just multiplied dramatically. And so we have to focus in on, okay, what can we do to make sure that bonding experience happens? What can we do to make sure that moms don't have to go back to work in a couple of weeks, which, by the way, only, 2/3 of American moms don't have paid any kind of family leave to do it. So, yeah, and particularly lower income moms, many places go back to work within a week or 2 weeks of after having a child, which is just, I mean, it's almost mind-boggling to think about that. But that happens in America. And the detriment is not just to the mom, who's obviously going through a lot of difficulties hormonally and otherwise after just having a child, but think about the consequences to the child and the long-term impact on our country as a result of it. Well, as you can imagine, the left, as this issue has become more prevalent, the left says, oh, we got an idea. We'll create a new government program. We'll tax a bunch of people. We'll mandate all these things. And that's their answer to everything. It's the answer to healthcare. It's the answer, government will do it. And the response on the Republican side, well, let's just let the free market do it. Let the private sector figure it out. And again, you understand that the private sector does figure some of these things out, but again, the government takes away a lot of money from the private sector. They create a lot of incentives for the private sector to do certain things in providing the benefits they provide. So the government's already sort of weighing in with the private sector, sort of directing them how to, in a sense, take care of their employees in some respects. Well, what we're saying is, let's not do that. And this, to be very clear, I'm not suggesting that the federal government come in and tell the businesses to do anything. In fact, back in the 1990s, there was a bill called the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a non-paid leave. I voted against it. Why? Because it was a mandate on business. And so when it comes to paid family leave, I'm not for a mandate on business. I just don't think it's the right thing to do. I don't think the government should be telling businesses how to run their businesses. They do, but I don't think we should be doing any more of that. What we should be doing is looking, are there ways in which we can get resources to moms and dads so they can connect with their children and help give them a viable, good start to their lives so they can be successful and good citizens of our country? And the answer is yes. There's actually been some ideas that have been put forward that do not create a new government program, do not create any new taxes, do not create any increased debt. You say, well, how do we do that? Well, there are two ideas. I'm going to talk about one today. One that has to do with Social Security, and the other one, the reason I want to talk about this, because it's bipartisan, and I think has the best chance of being successful at this point. And that is to use an existing federal program called the Child Tax Credit, and use that tax credit not just for every year you get a $2,500 tax credit, depending on your income, but for lower and moderate income people, it's $2,500. So you get a $2,500 tax credit every year up until that child's over the age of 18, and then you lose your tax credit. But I think, what we're saying is, yes, all those years are important, but the most important thing is for that mom to have that time, both for her and for the father to spend time at home with that child, to bond with that child. Father-child bonding occurs after birth and shortly thereafter. I mean, moms bond with their child because they're carrying that child, but dads don't. And so that time after birth is vitally important for fathers, particularly fathers who are not, living with the mom, to find that attachment and become, a more nurturing part of that child's life. So both paternity and maternity leave are vitally important. And so what we're trying to say is, let's take an existing program, where people can take money that they would otherwise be getting in years, when the child's 2, 3, 4, or 5 years of age, and move some of that money to the time of right after the child's born, and give them a slug of money that would otherwise be paid to them later, give it to them now, so they can take time off from work because their work isn't providing any kind of paid family leave. This is, again, it's freedom because you get to choose. It's optional. Nobody is forcing any mom or dad to do it. It's using existing government benefits, no new money and no new taxes. And so this is a conservative idea that says we're giving this money out anyway. Let's do it in a way that maximizes the benefit to the child and to the mom and to the dad and to the society as a whole. So I understand how conservatives say, why are we getting involved in something like this? And the answer is, number one, the government is involved. And if we don't do something, the government's going to get really involved. I see it. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen it over and over and over where Republicans say, no, we don't have an answer. We, let the private market work. And the need builds up, and the compelling case for some action keeps building, and we keep saying no, and so they turn to the left, and then we're stuck with trying to Medicare prescription drug. Another good example. I can go example after example where the pressure was building for the government to do something on an issue, and our answer was let the private sector do it, instead of saying, are there innovative ways that we can tweak things to actually make things work? But yeah, having some de minimis government involvement to make sure that the market works better. That's what I think conservatism is. It's not no government. It's the idea that we have as little government as possible, and we do it in a way that provides maximum flexibility and minimal impact on the economic growth of our country. And that's what I think we've accomplished here. I'm excited about it. It's one of the reasons that I'm out here talking about it. And it's something the president is strongly in favor of, has mentioned it in every one of his State of the Union addresses. And so I'm hopeful that we can get a lot of support behind doing something. And I'm for doing it at the federal level because I think it makes the most sense there. And it's using existing programs as opposed to trying to create something at the state level. I think that's a lot more complicated. And so I think that the solution that works best is the one that uses no new taxes, no new debt, and existing dollars, giving people choices. Back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, so Senator, one of the questions that kept coming up in these whiteboard sessions, as you know, I've traveled around the state to listen to people who were parents, people who ran crisis pregnancy centers, people who were involved in the pro-life movement, people who ran small businesses, to get a sense of how they would respond to an idea of taking a cash advance on a child tax credit, as you outlined. And one of the concerns that came up at different points was, well, what about accountability? How do you know that they're going to spend that cash on diapers and formula? And how do you know they're not going to go out and spend it irresponsibly? And that was a concern that came up from people, I think, in many cases, who had raised their families, who live responsibly, and look over and say, okay, we'll help you in other ways, food, maybe some housing. But when we get into parenting, that feels like it's a bridge too far. How do you respond to that kind of a question?
Well, I guess I would say that all of this money that they're getting anyway. They're just getting it next year. So if they were going to blow it, they'd blow it next year too, I guess, if that's the concern. I mean, but I guess this worries me a little bit that it sounds to me like an argument from the left, which is we're going to be prescriptive and we're going to tell people how to spend their money, that we know better. I mean, I thought we trusted families. I thought we believed that people should keep more of their money, not less, and that they should have the ability to be able to spend the money as they see fit. Now, are there going to be people who misspend their money? Of course there are. I think all of us at some point in time are guilty of having not been the most prudent with our finances. And, are there things that we can do though? I mean, this is where I think we somehow fall short. I use the pro-life issue as an example. For a long time, we kept saying, don't have an abortion, don't have abortion's immoral, abortion's wrong. And we just went out there and said, no, 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 no. And attitudes on abortion really didn't change for a long time in America. In fact, we were sort of losing the battle. Then something happened and the pro-life movement decided, instead of just going out there and saying no, let's go out there and actually love people. Let's go actually and try to care for people. Because this is a problem and it's not going away by us just saying, no, don't do it. We have to meet people where they are. It's a broken world. People make lots of mistakes and they do things wrong and they have to live with the consequences of, well, let's help them. And thus the crisis pregnancy movement was born. And there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of centers all over America that are there meeting moms and dads too, and trying to help them through the love of Jesus Christ primarily, and saying, we want to be there for you because we do actually care about your baby. We do actually care about you. We actually want to be a culture of life. And so we want to engage you and help you manage this problem. So here's what I would say to people who say, well, they're going to mismanage this money. Well, why don't you help them? Why don't we, if you're at a church, why don't you say, to engage moms who are having children and maybe in some cases, through a crisis pregnancy, potentially, engage them in financial resources, management, and talk to them about how they can better take care of themselves and that new child that's on the way. I mean, I just think instead of just saying, well, they won't do it, and therefore we shouldn't give them the resources to be able to take that time off, how about engaging them and help them do it? This is sort of, even conservatives get caught in this trap that unless the government tells you how to spend your money, that somehow or another, there's no way to get people to do it right. And we used to be a society that, we had private charities that gave money to people who were hurting and they were involved in their lives. They didn't just hand them a check, but they got involved in their lives and helped them, not just financially, but otherwise lift themselves up. I remember reading, it was a very influential book for me to read, Marvin Olasky's The Tragedy of American Compassion. And he talked about the old charities and how people engaged those who were less fortunate and saw it as their civic responsibility to help, not to pay their taxes, not to have the government give them money, but it was their responsibility as community members, as churchgoers. And that's what I would say. I would push back at them saying, don't just point your finger and say, oh, those people won't spend the money right. Do something about it. If we're going to, help them, get involved, have programs that your church runs or your community organizations run to help these people who are struggling be successful.
And I guess one of the things that I did hear from people in these conversations was that argument that you just rebutted was followed by another one that said, well, maybe we should mandate, financial literacy or education programs along with this ability to take a cash advance on your child tax credit. What's the response to that? I mean, it sounds what you're saying is that it is when the private sector and churches and faith-based people who are motivated by, as you say, the love of Christ, are married with some new economic freedom that the government provides. That's the ideal solution, perhaps not mandating financial literacy.
Let's think about that. So, so the government mandates financial literacy. What does that mean? So now you're going to have some government agency responsible for education and training of people who get that. And then you're going to have people who are going to be checking on folks. And you're now creating a new bureaucracy potentially, if you want to enforce it. Now, if you don't want to enforce it, you can just mandate it and not do anything about it. I mean, that's one thing, you can do that. But if you actually want to create a requirement, then you have to spend money to make sure that requirement's fulfilled. So now you're spending additional government dollars, hiring government people, creating government program to make sure that what percentage of these moms and dads are going to mismanage their money. Let's take a high number. Let's say 25%. So for 75% of the money, it's going to be spent appropriately. People are going to take their time off. They're going to do their best. I mean, not going to be perfect, but they're going to spend the money that most people say, oh, that's pretty reasonable. And so now you're going to create a new bureaucracy, spend more money, maybe than the whole program cost to begin with, to monitor people. this is the problem that we sometimes get into, that sort of it's the nanny state. It's the idea that the government has to oversee everything instead of trusting people and trusting the private sector, the nonprofits, the community organizations, family members. I mean, you can also, we didn't even mention other family members who could also be involved in helping engage. So I guess if you want to put a recommendation, or if you want to create some incentives for people to get that, that's fine. But I don't think a requirement is going to, it would be another government boondoggle from my perspective.
So here's another one, and this came up at every one of our sessions: Philadelphia, Lancaster, Erie, Pittsburgh, and they said the same thing, which is, okay, we might be able to buy this controlled program now that you're putting under the umbrella of paid family leave, using money that you already have coming to you through a child tax credit. But the big but comes, well, but where does it end? Like, when we know that Senator Santorum's allies in the Senate are well-intentioned, but when the Democrats get a hold of this program, they're going to blow it up, and we're going to be spending a lot more money.
Yeah, here's what I would say to that. That's what I remember back in the late 90s. I introduced a bill. You may remember Dick Armey. Dick was a congressman from Dallas, and who was I think he was the majority whip when Newt Gingrich took over the House back in 1994-95. And believe it or not, the uninsured issue was a big problem. Even back then, we had, 15-20% of the public had no health insurance. And so Dick and I came up with the idea of providing tax credits for people who didn't have insurance. So we would treat them in a sense the same as other people who have employer provided insurance get, which is that tax dollars, that money spent on healthcare isn't taxed. Money spent on health insurance isn't taxed. So you get a tax credit, which would be the equivalent of a dollar for dollar. It cost, if I recall, when we first, it was something in the order of $5 to $10 billion. I mean, it was a fair amount of money. And people said, you do this, and then where does it stop? Look, you're spending this amount of money, and then then you're going to have a tax, something for this. And so conservatives, many in my own state, would say, oh, this is just big government conservatism. So we did nothing, and the problem persisted, and boom, now we're spending trillions of dollars, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars a year. And what's the Republican answer? Well, let's just take that money and spend it in a way that's more conservative. I mean, yeah, some people would like to get rid of it. Well, good luck getting rid of a big government program. It's never been done in the history of this country. So maybe it could be done, but the point is we could do something incremental. I always use the pressure cooker example. You can let the pressure build until the pot explodes and you get all the bad left-wing ideas thrown at America, and we have to recover from it again. Or you can let the steam out of the pot to the point where you're solving most of the problem, and actually the kettle works pretty well. And that's what I think we have here. If you look at the other areas where people want to expand family leave, and I always say I'm not for paid family leave, I'm for paid paternity leave. And it's just specifically to paternity for the birth or adoption of a child. Why? Because that's the area where there is probably the least amount of support within the private sector for moms and dads. But everybody who works gets some sort of sick leave. Everybody who works gets some sort of personal leave. There are all sorts of programs out there, for to take care of people with who have workers' comp or other types of injuries or illnesses and things like that. So there are lots of state programs and federal programs that take care of a lot of these other issues. But there really isn't anything that takes care of paid family leave, of the birth of a child. And I can't think of anything more consequential to the future of our country than making sure that our children who are being born today have a stable upbringing so they have a chance of being successful. Not that caring for an older parent isn't important for our country, but that's not the future of our country. I mean, that, caring for an elderly parent isn't going to change the future course of our country. Whereas not giving a child a stable bonding experience, or millions of children a stable bonding experience, will change the future of our country, will dramatically change the future of our country. So to me, this is the most consequential thing we can do. And I think that's the reason it's the most compelling, and frankly should be limited to that.
So how do you say then to people who are saying, well, would it work, Rick? Could it work? There's an aspirational piece to this where you see the future. This could be one of the tools that rescues, that stabilizes the birth rate, or that, and all of the consequences that come out of that perhaps stabilizes the family, keeps more dads at home. But some would say, hey, that's a theory. Where's the evidence that this could work?
Well, yeah, I would say the evidence is, well, let me just say, there's one country that has actually tried this. There's actually several European countries that are doing things to try to stabilize families and increase birth rates because of the concern that it has for the future of their country. The one that has been the most aggressive is Hungary. And Hungary has not just paid family leave, but they have other types of structures in place to support and nurture families, encourage births, encourage moms and or dads, but moms or dads to stay home and be the caregiver to make sure that we have stable families and children getting the proper bonding and nurturing that they need. And it's been overwhelming. I mean, Hungary's birth rate.
Why did they do that? Why did Hungary decide? What were the cultural, political atmospherics that led Hungary to decide that was a good public policy?
Hungary was a communist state, and when the Soviet Union dissolved, Hungary became, over a period of years, became a democracy, and with that, sort of, tried to assimilate into Western European world, and the the pluses and minuses of that is that they became much more affluent, and with that, birth rates plummeted, and number one. Number two, they're on the border of, let's just say, some, the Middle East and some areas, of the former Soviet Union that are not so profitable, and as a result, immigration became a huge issue. So it was a confluence of factors: low birth rates, pressure from immigration, and so the government said, look, we need to maintain. For them, it was about maintaining their culture, maintaining their identity. They've gotten a lot of criticism from the Eurocentric folks and from the progressives, but they believe in they're a very strong Christian country, Catholic and Hungarian Reform. They're very very proud ethnic country, and so they wanted to make sure that the Hungarian nature of their country was maintained. And so they said, we can sit here and let the country die off and bring people from other areas of the world to do jobs here, or we can try to do something to grow our country. And so that was the motivation behind it. And you probably have seen Hungary has been one of the toughest on immigration. They've been able to survive because their country is growing in other ways.
The political roadmap for paid paternity leave, using your words there, what does it look like? What are the implications of a Biden presidency, of a Trump presidency? What path do we take? And then who are the players to watch in the Senate that will be critical? And because you do hear on this issue, it's the Elizabeth Warrens or the Kristen Gillibrands, who are getting all the ink on paid family leave. Who are the conservatives? Who do we have to watch?
Yeah, the two people that have been the most vocal are Marco Rubio and Bill Cassidy. Marco on one of the bills, Joni Ernst, Joni and Marco are involved in one. Mike Lee is another one. By the way, Marco and Mike Lee are not considered, the more liberal members of Congress. I mean, these are pretty strong conservative folks, different in their own way. Mike's more libertarian. Marco a little bit more blue collar conservative, sort of along my thinking, but both, I think, very strong conservatives, and both see this as an essential part. You may remember I wrote a book when I was in the Senate called "It Takes a Family," and I think one of the things I said is the Republican Party talks so much about capital and how important economic capital is, and it is important, and economic growth is important. But there's another form of capital that's equally important, and that's human capital. And we can't have a strong economy if you don't have workers and people who are living decent lives and working hard and making that whole system work, and living virtuous lives. I mean, you're seeing it in neighborhoods where you don't see a lot of virtue signaling, and you see a lot of economic problems, a lot of crime problems, a lot of safety problems. So human capital is just as important, and I think now increasingly both sides of the Republican Party, the sort of the libertarian and the more blue collar side of the party, are understanding that's important. So it's good to see Bill Cassidy and Mike Lee and Marco Rubio and Joni Ernst sort of joining together to do it. And there's a Democrat, Kristen Sinema, who's a senator from Arizona, has signed on to the Cassidy bill. So I would look to them. The problem is, if Donald Trump isn't elected, I think this issue goes the way a lot of these issues are going. I think this could be the Obamacare big win for them, that they would push what's called the Family Act, which is an enormous expansion of government, increase in taxes, brand new program, providing all sorts of quote, leave for a variety of different things, dramatically impacting the ability for businesses to be able to be competitive. I just think it's,
so it happens either way.
Yeah.
It's the question is how does it happen? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen. I mean, if Trump's reelected, I have no doubt that there will be strong bipartisan support for a paid paternity leave in the line of what Cassidy Sinema is about, and I think it's very likely to pass. I don't see a lot of opposition. I mean, you have some on the Republican side who think we shouldn't do anything, and you have some on the Democratic side who think it's not sufficient. But I do think there's a big middle there on both sides. You see this as something that needs to be done, and would be a very strong positive step in the right direction. And look, obviously, if Nancy Pelosi in the House and she continues to behave the way she's behaving now, which is no compromise, then maybe the bill doesn't pass. But I would think that if Trump wins and the Republicans maintain control of the Senate, that Pelosi as well as Schumer may have to rethink their the way they're approaching this as whether that's a winning strategy or not.
Senator, two more questions.
Yeah.
One, just your sense of the conservative movement, the health of the conservative movement. There is a sense that by many who are observing this time that we've moved to a kind of populism that isn't connected to ideology or conservatism as they recognize it. Where do those people go? How do you address them to say stay engaged, stay involved, that there are ideas that are still working their way through the system in spite of what appears to be a red team and a blue team and not a place for ideas to live?
Yeah, look, one of the things, and you mentioned this in your introduction, that the Republican Party has changed. And the reason, and look, a lot of it is the culture, and some of it's economic. On the cultural side, when I ran in 1994, I won Montgomery County, I won Bucks County, I won Chester County, I won Delaware County. In fact, I won them by enough to offset the how much I lost in the city of Philadelphia. Think about that. I mean, you think that's impossible today. That's not even. I mean, why? Well, a lot of it was the culture, and with wealth, as we've seen this, it's, as the Lord says, it's harder for the camel to pass through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter heaven. I mean, people divorce themselves from faith and from truth, and they see themselves as, I always say the number one commandment that's most number one violated. I think it's why it's first is, there's only honor the Lord thy God. There's only one God, and people put themselves in the place of God and they set their own rules. They have their own 10 commandments. And I think that's happening. The more you believe that your success is your own, the less you think God has a role in your life. And so I think that's what happens to a lot of people who have a lot of success. They buy it that they did it, and that they did it by their own commandments, and so they worship themselves. And so when it comes to a lot of the cultural issues that Republicans stand by, thankfully, they say no. I'm gonna adopt what the progressive cultural commandments are, not us, and we lose them. And so that's been happening for 25 years. Well, then how do Republicans win? Well, it's because the people who haven't adopted those things. And people say, well, Trump does better among moderate and low income people. Why? Because, they haven't bought into the cultural moment, the wokeness that many in the suburbs have. And so you say, well, how does that party that culturally is now aligned with people who may not necessarily agree with all of our economic policies? That's the real rub here. And that's where I get back to that, we have to have policies that grow the economy, but also are concerned that make sure that all Americans participate in that growth, that we are. And that's why, I ran in 2012 for president. I ran on manufacturing. I mean, God bless Donald Trump and what he's doing, but I talked about energy and manufacturing and creating blue collar jobs and doing things to make sure that people had the ability to be successful. And I also talked about, that we have other forces in the world. Yeah, the Soviet Union's gone, but the idea that there's going to be a unipolar world forever, and the United States is, as the end of history, that no more division, there won't be any superpowers or any division among countries. That's ridiculous. It's never happened in the history of the world. It will never happen. We have to understand that we have to look after the interests of the United States and make sure that we are successful, and that means that there has to be a thriving middle of America. And if there isn't a thriving middle of America, then democracies fall apart. Look at Venezuela. Look at, now even Colombia, obviously other places around the world that have collapsed because there was a segregation of wealth. And so Trump understands this, Republicans understand this, and working people get that the Democratic Party, and they're focused on climate change and getting rid of fossil fuels and exporting manufacturing and is not for them. It's not going to be successful for them. And so we have to be that blend that says we have to represent the interest of the people who share our values and make sure they are successful, or democracy falls. And I understand you have purists out there and say, well, Ronald Reagan said to do it this way. Well, Ronald Reagan was 40 years ago. I mean, that's like Ronald Reagan getting up and talking about what Wendell Willkie would have campaigned on. I mean, Ronald Reagan didn't go back 40 years and say, oh, this is what worked 40 years ago. Ronald Reagan today would be leading the charge for the things that we're talking about. Why? Because he understands the dynamics he understood the dynamics in America at the time that he was running. And he understood these divisions that I talk about. You have to understand what is America today. It's not the same country that it was 40 years ago. I wish it, in some respects it were. In other respects, we've made some great strides and some improvements. But the bottom line is Republicans have to understand that who we are, and we are blue collar America. We are not, and this is another thing with the economy. I know I'm going long here, but this is so important that 100 years ago, every business owner was a Republican. All of them. They were all Republicans because, as Calvin Coolidge said, the business of America is business. And so for years, Republicans dominated the boardrooms and dominated all the big industries. Now, there are no Republicans in major corporations in America today. They just don't exist. Particularly if you will, we went through an industrial revolution, all Republican leaders. Now we're going through a technological revolution, all Democrats, all progressives. And so they now have all the money. They have all the billionaires. They have, in a sense, control of the boardroom. And so the idea that we're going to have a society that's going to just focus on making these people wealthier is insane. I mean, it's destructive of our own interests, but more importantly, destructive of the country in centralizing power in a group of progressives who want to turn us into a socialist nation. So Republicans, and this is why I just pull my hair out at the Never Trumpers, Republicans have to come to grips with the existential battle we're in and who's on our side and how we can grow that number and meld this pro-growth economics with being concerned about the worker and the ability for middle Americans to thrive.
Final question is a personal one. A lot of people are watching today, and people who have attended leadership conferences over the years watched your family grow up, and now you've had, there's been since births and weddings and all kinds of milestones in your family. Could you just give a little update on your family? The nation got to know Bella during the presidential campaigns, but you have other children. And just give a little update and a closing word to people who are watching the PA Leadership Conference this year.
Well, thank you, and thanks for asking about my family. Karen and I are very, very blessed. As you mentioned, since I left the Senate, we had a little girl whose name was Bella, excuse me. She's 12 years old. She is thriving. She, may recall she has a disability called trisomy 18, which the medical community say is a death sentence, and unfortunately for 99% of kids it is. But for Bella, it has not been, and she is thriving. She is the happiest little girl. She makes every day better for us around this house, and so we have her here. We care for her every day, and we feel so blessed to have her a part of our life. We have. Of our children, you may remember those little kids running around the state. Now one of them is married. Our oldest, Elizabeth. We were supposed to have a wedding last week, but coronavirus sort of put the end to that. And so we're hoping to have a wedding of our number 3 son here. They're trying to figure out. Unfortunately, her family's from Scotland, and so there's a travel ban, so they can't come to the United States. And so we have to sort of wait for the travel ban to drop, and then we'll do a wedding. And then I've got our number 2 son, John, is getting married in December. So we've got everybody. My daughter, my number 4, Sarah Maria, is working at a crisis pregnancy center. She graduated from Villanova, and she just got a job there, and we're so proud of her and the work she's doing. She just called me last week and said, "Dad, I got a new ultrasound. for the center." So she's carrying on the work of the Santorum crew on the pro-life cause. And then 2 in college, and then our little Bella. So everybody's doing well, and we're just, as I said, I got to close with how I started. Just so grateful for the opportunity the people of Pennsylvania gave me to have a voice in Washington and on a whole variety of issues. We talked about one today, but that wouldn't have been the case had people not taken a chance on back in Pittsburgh with a 32-year-old kid who had never run for anything, and gave me a chance. And I'm forever grateful for that opportunity and for the opportunity to serve Pennsylvania United States Senate. I sort of feel, in many respects, my wife says, "Why do you keep involved in all this public policy stuff? It doesn't pay you anything. You just do it, because you want to be involved." And I said, "Well, it's just paying back. I mean, I just feel like, the people of Pennsylvania gave me the opportunity to have that impact and to gain knowledge and to, learn a lot of things, to have a positive impact going forward. And so I want to continue to make sure that, we're giving back to a country that's given me a lot, and to a group of people who gave me a great opportunity. So thank you."
Well, thank you, Senator Santorum, and to everyone who's been watching this issue and just concerned about the direction of the country and the stability of families and the need to provide public policy solutions rooted in conservatism and a principled approach. Thanks for watching this segment of the PA Leadership Conference. So we invite you to learn more, to find out about how you can make your voice known to people who are in positions of power, who are sitting in the Senate, who are sitting in the House of Representatives, and for those who at the state level are exploring ways to lend their voice and support, we encourage you to do that. So thank you to Senator Santorum, and thank you to the PA Leadership Conference for the opportunity to bring an important issue to the fore. Thanks so much for watching.